Let's be consistent.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Key to Consistency. I am your host, Rakia Collins, and on today's episode, we are going to be exploring the relationship between consistency and lying, right? And before we get into this week's episode, I do want to start with a bit of a story, because I know that when we think about a liar, someone who is constantly dishonest, someone who constantly does not tell the truth, or they don't tell the full truth, it can be a pretty interesting topic, right? So I do want to start the conversation today by just letting you guys know that I was once a person who was not always honest. It was when I was younger, I had to be between the ages of like 11 and 13. I went through a period of just not telling the truth. I would make up these extravagant stories. I would take something of my older sister's and then try to hide it, and then come back with like why it was missing. And she would ask me why it's missing. And I'm like, it's just not here. Right. And I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell you guys a very specific story. I took and I believe I wore one of her shirts, right? And I know that may not be a weird phenomenon, especially if you have siblings of the same sex. You guys might have worn each other's stuff, right? But I wasn't supposed to wear it. And so I took it anyway and I wore it. And it was just something in me that did not like the idea or the thought of her accusing me of taking it, even though I took it, right? And this is where the story kind of gets a bit extreme. I threw it away. I threw her shirt in the trash. And I remember being so nervous because she was searching around the house. She was yelling. At that point, because my mom knew that at that phase of my life, I was having a tendency of lying. So as my sister's going around the house saying I took it, I'm like, no, I didn't. And you can't prove it. And all this other type of stuff. And so I got nervous because she started to go outside, because I was so thorough. I threw her shirt not in the trash in the house, but in the trash like outside. And so when she started to go outside and look through the trash, I got so nervous. And I remember feeling like she cannot find this. Like she cannot find this shirt in the trash. And so I remember, long story short, my mom yelling at me. I can't remember if they ever found it, but I just remember my mom was like, you need to stop because you're becoming a habitual liar. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I am lying for no reason. Like, why am I lying? Like, one, I shouldn't have taken something that didn't belong to me. And now I'm lying to cover up the fact that I took the shirt. It was just a lot. It was a lot for no reason. And so even if you're listening and you're like, I've never went through a phase like this, lying might not have been your vice. It might have been something else that you went through a phase with. And you're like, man, why can I stop doing this? Right. So hopefully you learned something from today's episode. I wanted to give you guys a bit of a background about that, because I don't want you to think that anything I'm going to say today is coming across from an elitist or condescending perspective. Right. I was there. I know what it's like to lie. Sometimes you lie because you're nervous and you're trying to cover up something. And other times you lie because you're trying to protect someone that you love and care about. So as we go into today's episode, I really want you guys to have an open mind and an open lens. And as mentioned earlier, even if your vice isn't necessarily lying, whatever you're doing that you know is not beneficial to you, these are actionable steps that you can take yourself in order to make sure that you really look at what you're doing and try to course correct. So when we think about why do we lie, the first thing that I want to talk through is the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness, right? We have to start by acknowledging that I have a tendency to lie. I can be a liar, right? Those may not be easy phrases to say to yourself, especially in today's society where we like to look at the world with these rose-colored glasses, if you will. But when you're doing your own self-reflection and your own awareness, you know yourself, you know your tendencies, and you know that you have to start from a place of truth. in order to get better. And so I would encourage you just to take a moment and do some introspection and really identify your personal tendencies and patterns around being dishonest. Are there certain situations or certain triggers that lead you down the path of just not being truthful, right? The first exercise that I want you to perform is being self-aware, because being self-aware is going to allow you to progress forward in a more authentic way of living in the truth. When you think about being self-aware, it's not easy, right? I know it's easy for you to listen to me and for me just to say, hey guys, be more self-aware. It's not easy because you really have to dive into the intricate web of your lying motivation, right? What is driving you to consistently lie? Are you trying to protect yourself? Are you trying to gain approval? So do you stretch the truth and you kind of embellish a little bit to kind of puff yourself up, right? Maybe it's to avoid confrontation, right? I know that sometimes when you lie, it may be because you are in a situation where you just want to get out of it as quickly as possible, right? And that was where I found myself, last week, right? Not telling the whole truth because I didn't want to hurt someone's feelings who was very close to me. And that, in my mind, is just as bad as me lying, because when you don't tell someone the full truth because you want to avoid a confrontation, that speaks to a deeper rooted issue, right? And so I'll tell you guys that story a little bit later in today's episode as to what happened with that confrontation. But I did, again, want to just put in another personal story so you guys know that talking through this with you guys is not easy for me. But I know that it's something that, because we're all on this consistency journey together, we have to really look at and do some introspection. So when we understand what situations, what patterns, what habits do we have around consistently lying, these motivations help us really grasp the why behind our actions. It is a pathway for us to have self-compassion on ourselves, to be able to relate with ourselves, and really paves the way to self-growth, right? It's not a way for you to just sit in your own pity and to be like, I'm just a liar. There's no hope for me. I can't. No. That's not what we're doing. We have to start from a place of self-reflection. So that way, once we know the why behind why we continue to do this, we can really begin to chart a path to get better. When we think about consistently lying, it has a profound impact, not just on you, right, in your own feelings towards yourself, but it also has a negative impact on the relationships that we hold close to us, right? When I was telling you guys my first story when I was younger about lying, it's like to have my mom say, you're becoming a habitual liar. Like, this is, of course, the woman that brought me into this world. And so to know that I have done so many different things that she was trying to call out of me, hey, this is what you're becoming. You don't need to become this. It hurt, to be honest with you. It stung to have someone that is that close to you call out something like that about you. And so I want you guys to know that we have to explore and consider the fact that this behavior not only impacts your own self-esteem, right? It impacts the trust that others place in you. So what that does now is it prohibits you from having an environment of honesty, authenticity, and trust with those around you. And there are enough lies going around, enough fake news going around in the world. The relationships that we hold near and dear, we don't want to have to question those, right? We want a place where we can feel safe. We want a place where we can be with people and not have to worry about their motives, not have to worry about, hey, are you for me or against me, right? Like, there's just enough out in the world to where when we think about our own little intricate pieces of happiness that we have with our family, with our friends, with those that are close to us, we want to make sure that there's no reason for these individuals not to trust us. When you think about consistently lying, if you find that you are in a space where this is not something that you can stop. I know that I went through a phase when I was younger where I was consistently lying. And I do want to draw a distinction because when I was younger, it was a habit. I'm here to tell you, the sky might have been purple messing with me, right? If you were to ask me anything. And I know, as we grow up and as we grow and mature, there are times where you might tell small lies, you might embellish, you might not necessarily tell the full truth, but it is something that you don't do every single day. Practice it, right? So I do want to make that as a distinction, because if you find that lying consistently is something that you have entrenched yourself in so deeply that you are not believe that it's something you can get yourself out of by yourself, that is where we should seek professional help. If it is not something that, it just happens every once in a while, and even when it happens, you're cognizant of, hey, you're not telling the truth, and it begins to kind of say, hey, let's not do this again, right? Let's snap out of that, right? But if you find that it's something that you do all the time, you may tell a lie 4 or 5 times a day, every day, right? If not more than that, that may be where we may want to pivot from just listening to Rakia's podcast on this episode to incorporating a trained expert that can really help you navigate those underlying issues that contribute to the lying behavior, right? Making sure that you don't lie. Again, it has to do with you and your self-esteem, yes, but it also has to do with the way you show up in the world. Because if you're lying consistently, there's almost always a deep-seated issue or concern that is deep down. Maybe it's something you're trying to avoid or go around, and it's something that you have to fight or go through by yourself, right? You can get the help that you need and really invest in laying the groundwork for a lasting transformation. If we can just, at this point, just sit back, right? Sit back and just imagine a future of yourself where you are honest and you are self-aware and you allow your self-awareness to guide your actions, right? Acknowledge that the path to not lying may have its hurdles, but it is a journey that is certainly worth embracing. We have to embrace accountability, not just to ourselves, but also to others, because it is very, very important. And so before I get into the action step, I do want to go back to how maybe last week or a few days ago, I was in a situation where I was trying to avoid conflict and did not tell the person the full truth, right? It was a situation with someone that is very, very close to me. And so the person was asking me for something, and I was partially working at the time. I was just, you're at the tail end of your day. You're kind of ready to be off work. And then you have someone who's close to you and they're calling you for something, and they're calling you because they need something from you, right? And you just gave your all, at least for me anyway. I just gave my all at work, and I was just tired, not trying to be bothered, not trying to help address anyone else's need. And so we had the conversation. I was a bit tense at the beginning of the conversation. And as the conversation progressed, we got on the right foot, I'd say. And then the person said to me, well, initially, I didn't want to call you to ask you about the thing that I need because it seemed like you had an attitude with me, right? And so I told the person, yes, I had an attitude, but partially it was because of work, right? And when I sat back and I tried to reflect on that, it was the truth, because I did have a tense day at work, but it wasn't the full truth, because that situation did contribute to the fact that I had an even bigger attitude, right? And it was me sitting back in that moment, and I had to acknowledge that because you didn't want to have conflict with this particular individual, you didn't tell them that while, yes, work was part of the problem, you are also part of the problem. Because again, it was a personal conversation. It was a very emotional conversation on that person's part. And so I'm like, you don't want to continue to add fuel to the fire. And it was something that, looking back on it now, I should have just been completely honest, irrespective of how emotionally charged the conversation is. Because in this particular instance, the emotions that that person was feeling at that moment had nothing to do with me. And as crazy and as selfish as that may sound, me not feeling like I can be my authentic self with someone that is that close to me because I want to sugarcoat it to water down the truth for you, that doesn't do you any good. Right. And so that was just my recent incident with lying or not telling the full truth to someone. And it really does more harm than good, because even after the conversation, I was thinking about it and I was like, man, I should have told that person the truth. Now, it didn't necessarily impact my self-esteem or like my thought about myself, but it was just one of those things where you're like, man, I really should have just said what it was. I shouldn't have tried to sugarcoat it or water it down. But, if you find yourself in a situation like that, I would encourage you to lead, of course, with love, but always tell the truth. Even if the truth isn't necessarily comforting and it's not what that person wants to hear, you have to, and you owe it to yourself and to that person to be as honest as possible while still being kind, right? Being honest doesn't give you the right or the license to just be abrasive and to be rude. You can still be kind and honest and truthful and forthcoming all at the same time. Right. So now let's get into our action step. I would invite you guys to take a journal and write down those instances where you notice that you have a tendency of lying, right? If you notice that you find yourself in a situation like me where it was about conflict and confrontation, me having to do additional self-reflection to say, well, do you have a problem with conflict? Do you have a problem with making sure that when a situation gets tense, you can still have control of your emotions, right? And do you try to lie to get out of that? What are those motivations behind when you don't tell the truth or when you're inclined to not tell the truth? Really consider the impact that those instances have had on you and on those around you. The point of that exercise and writing it down is really to make sure that we lay the proper foundation for the journey ahead when those same situations or similar situations arise. You see it coming because you documented it and you're now able to proceed in a manner that allows you to live an honest life because you're not going to fall into the trap of telling a lie. This episode is sponsored by yours truly, Rakia Collins. And if you need to be reminded to stay consistent throughout your entire day, there's no better way to do that than to have visual cues throughout your day, right? And for those visual cues, visit our merch shop. We have phone cases that remind you to be consistent. We have coffee mugs that remind you about the importance of consistency. And so visit our site at thekeytoconsistency.com. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Awesome, guys. The next thing that I want to talk to you all about is going to be, now that we've kind of done our self-reflection, we've kind of gotten it down, pen to paper, right? We understand the circumstances under which we tend to not tell the truth. We understand the why behind why we may not be inclined to tell the truth. But next, we are going to get into radical honesty and how we can practice radical honesty, right? Like everything in life, most things begin with a commitment. Whether we're talking about losing weight or drinking a gallon of water a day or applying for a certain number of jobs a day or going for walking X number of steps, whatever you're doing, it starts with a commitment, right? And so you have to look within yourself and commit to yourself to be consistently truthful in every facet of your life, right? Honesty and being honest is not about avoiding telling lies. It is about actively choosing to speak and live in alignment with your values. You don't value not telling the truth. You value, I'm assuming if you listen to this podcast, you value consistency in living out the values that are going to help you be the best version of yourself, right? And because of that, making sure that you speak and live in alignment with your values is about being a beacon of authenticity, even when it is difficult. It is difficult, as we talked about earlier in today's episode, to be that beacon of consistency, especially when you're dealing with those close and intimate relationships. But guys, when I tell you, you have no choice. You do yourself and this world a disjustice when you do anything that lives outside of your values. Embracing truthfulness and being truthful all the time can be challenging, especially when we're faced with situations that just make us uncomfortable. It is not a sprint. It is not even a marathon. It is a journey. It is something that will likely never end. It will be there until the day that you die. And that journey requires us to challenge ourselves to express our thoughts and our feelings and even move throughout the world in our actions in honesty while we're still respecting the boundaries of those around us. It is important that we strike that balance between expressing ourselves and respecting the boundaries of others. Striking that balance, honestly, as I'm thinking about it, it's like the tip of a pencil when that pencil is sharpened. It is that type of balance that allows for open and respectful communication, right? And of course, if you're someone who is eloquent of speech, right? You speak very well and you articulate yourselves with the best of them, right? Like you don't have a problem being honest in a way that is respectful to others. But there are some of us, my hand is raised, guys, that struggle with that really struggle with, I'm going to be authentically myself and engaged in an honest interaction with you, even if we're talking about something that I find very challenging. It's tough. It is not easy at all. But again, I would encourage you to work towards striking that balance. I would also encourage you to acknowledge your past mistakes and realize that just because we've been dishonest in our past, it is never, ever too late to take responsibility for those actions. By one, you may need to apologize and mend some past relationships, even if you decide, hey, I don't want to mend it because we're on two different paths, but I do want to at least extend an apology. What that does is really allows you to perform an act of humility for yourself. It shows that you're gaining strength in this particular area. You're letting go of your pride, you're letting go of your ego, and you're truly growing as a person. It is a step really towards healing your past wounds, because if those past wounds are not healed, if we just kind of heap dirt on them and kind of cover them up, what ultimately ends up happening is that we move throughout life and we carry those wounds with us, right? And what happens if you have an open wound that you don't put a Band-Aid over or you don't allow it to properly heal? Well, as you're moving throughout the world, that wound could gain bacteria. That wound could be infected. So now a problem that might have been on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the low end, it might have been a 2. Now that you've carried this throughout the world, it's gotten bacteria, it's gotten infected. Now you're in the hospital, right? Over something that could have just been, had you taken the time to heal it initially when it was a 1 or a 2, it would have never gotten to a 10, right? So that's really the importance of making sure you make amends, making sure that even if you can't make amends with that person because of that person may no longer be walking this earth, whatever it is, making sure that you may want to write them a letter in that situation just to kind of get it out of you and get it on a piece of paper, or whatever you find that you need to do to make sure that you've made amends with those past mistakes and you're not carrying a wound with you, is really the purpose of making sure that you make amends appropriately. When we think about being truthful is not just about sharing facts. As crazy as that may sound, right? It's about being vulnerable and about being open to embrace our authentic self and really connecting with each other on a deeper level. When we navigate throughout life, we have to remember that empathy plays a very big role in this entire process. It allows us to understand the impact of our words and our actions on other people. And that is so important, especially when we think about those close and intimate relationships. On a little bit of a side note, guys, but still relevant to this topic, do not allow your close and intimate relationships to become stale because you're so used to seeing this person or being around this person that you begin to treat them as if they're always going to be there. That is a lie from the pit of hell. That person may not always be there. Off the strength that we're humans and that we pass away, you should cherish and make sure that you're taking advantage of every single moment that you have with that person, that you're treasuring them. And a part of treasuring them is being truthful with them, being able to care enough about them to say, I'm going to swallow my need for approval. I'm going to swallow my tendency to avoid conflict. And I'm going to just tell you the truth. I'm going to just be completely honest with you and hope that we can have a conversation that shows that we're both just human. We're both just trying to make it, right? That is ultimately the goal of why we want to be truthful and why we want to steer clear of telling lies. So I would encourage you, and this is something that I have had to do as well, as you can tell by my recent incident with not telling the full truth. When you sit back and you think about a recent incident where you've not told the truth and you have to go back and make amends, I would consider how you can address it. Right? I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to say, hey, go to that person in person and talk to them. I'm not going to say, hey, text them or FaceTime them or whatever. No. Just consider how you can possibly address it. If you weren't completely honest, how can you possibly address that? Whether it's just having an open conversation, whether it's apologizing or making amends, whatever you need to do with that recent situation where you were not completely living in your authentic self because you had to lie, just consider how you can address that and consider how you can make amends for that. Guys, the last thing that I want to talk to you all about is going to be building a support system. Although we've been talking about lying, I know, as mentioned earlier, there are other vices that people may have that is tough to kind of get past or kind of get over. Building a support system will help you, and I'm talking leaps and bounds, right? When we think about how significant your surroundings, how much of a significant impact your surroundings will have on your behavior and on your attitude, right? When you surround yourself with people that prioritize being honest, it's more likely that you're going to be honest yourself. It's just a reminder that the people that we associate with can really elevate us, or they really can just hinder our growth. Right? They have those sayings like birds of a feather flock together, right? If you hang around 9-10 people, you'll be the 10th broke person. People say those type of cliche statements, but I've come to realize in my 28 years of walking this planet that when something is a cliche, there tends to be a grain of truth to it. And I genuinely believe that you are more than likely the sum of the people that you hang out with. If you hang out with people who are not honest, you will likely become a person who's not honest, even if that goes against your values, right? So we do want to be cognizant of who we're hanging out with and who we're associating with. Making sure that with your support system, you guys talk about accountability. Make sure you set out to find accountability partners in your support system, or maybe they're not accountability partners. Maybe it's an accountability mentor, right? Someone who has been there, done that, and can provide guidance and encouragement and really give you a safe place to help you share some of your challenges and your triumphs with them, right? These people should be the lighthouses, if you will, of support as we're navigating through, the way a lighthouse, kind of warns the boats of like, hey, this is where, like, hey, you're near land, right? That should be that person for you, that mentor. That should be that beacon, that lighthouse that kind of shines the light in the dark as you're going through this journey. When we think about having that support system, This is going to be tough because you're building a support system, and you have to be honest with your support system, but you're building a support system with people that you want to be honest with because you have a tendency to lie, right? And so it's a dichotomy of making sure that you practice open and honest communication with these people, even if you stumble, even if you go to them and they say, how was your day? And you say, hey, my day was so bad. I did X, Y, and Z, and it was just terrible. And you have a tendency to over dramatize, right? And even if you have to go back and say, you know what, guys, I'm sorry, that just was not true. I had an excellent day. I don't even know why I came in here, why I felt the need to try to tell you guys my day was bad. I was looking for sympathy and just couldn't articulate the fact that I just want sympathy, right? Like whatever it is that that you have a tendency to do when it comes to lying, press that into your support system. Let them know, guys, because I have a tendency to lie, don't expect the first thing I say to always be the truth, right? Let them know and structure your group in a way that says, I am genuinely trying to get help. That is the point of my statement, that because you've made this group around your lying, you want to make sure that you're truthful with them about, hey, I may not tell you the truth the first time you ask me something, or I may over dramatize, or whatever your thing is. You want to just set up your support group to be as successful as possible, because these are people that you want to share your progress with. You want to share your setbacks with. You want to share your moments of growth with, right? You want to share with them, hey, this is the situation in which I tend to not be honest, right? You want to share all of that with them. So as you progress and grow, this is the group of people that can help you. Right? We want to make sure that in this community, if we think about like a spider's web, we want to have a web of integrity. We want the threads of this web to be so tightly knit, and that the interconnectedness of the integrity in your group reminds you that you're not alone, that being honest is not something that, okay, man, I'm by myself. You're not by yourself. You have this support group for a reason. You guys are building this foundation of integrity together, right? And that your pursuit of being a truthful person is valued and it's respected. Right? As we wrap up today's episode, I really hope and invite you guys to begin to build a circle of integrity in your life. Build that support system. Reach out to a friend, a mentor, an accountability partner, whomever that you trust, and really share that commitment with them about, you know what? I'm going to tell the truth. That is a commitment. And be open and honest with each other and discuss how you can support each other. They may not necessarily have the same struggle that you have, but you could very well be able to support them in an area where you may be strong at. When we think about building a habit of consistently telling the truth, it requires self-reflection, self-discipline, and truly a commitment to personal growth. Right? When we as humans really understand the impact of consistent honesty and addressing the psychology behind why we have a tendency to lie and not tell the truth, it really cultivates a culture around us of authenticity and accountability. And it allows the individuals in our lives to strive for a life that is characterized by integrity and truthfulness. And that is something that this world needs. Individuals who are striving to be their best self and that value the things that will allow them to do so. And of course, guys, before we end today's episode, I do have a scripture for you guys. I'm sure you probably know what it is by the theme of today's episode, but it comes from Exodus chapter 20, verse 16. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. This commandment of God really, guys, it just emphasizes the importance of truthfulness and prohibits us from giving false testimony or spreading lies about each other. Like, it promotes honesty, integrity, respect for the reputation of ourselves and for the well-being of other people around us. Right? If we as humans uphold this commandment, it really encourages the society that we live in to be built on trust and foster healthy relationships that are based on truth and love. Remember, guys, consistency breeds mastery and it transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of The Key to Consistency. We'd love for you to review this podcast wherever you are listening to it. Please feel free to follow us on Instagram at thekeytoconsistency.com. And if you enjoyed this episode and you found something that was beneficial to you, of course, please share it with a friend and someone else that you think would benefit from starting their own consistency journey.